So why are you here, Mr. Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right. So it's not about you. It's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
It's not every day that Jeremy Clarkson swaps tractors for a verbal battering ram, but at a farmers' protest, he did just that, directly at Keir Starmer's Labour Party. With his trademark sarcasm, Clarkson dismantled Labour's inheritance tax policy, calling it a masterpiece of cluelessness. He pointed out how 96% of farmers would be financially gutted by the proposed reforms, a detail that might have escaped the urban masterminds in Westminster. Farmers, Clarkson reminded everyone, don't sit on vaults of gold. They're knee-deep in land, livestock and machinery. But hey, who cares about details when you're pandering to city voters?
Oh yeah, it's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
Then came the highlight. Clarkson compared Labour's policies to the scribblings of a sixth-form debating society. He gleefully mocked the idea that taxing farmers to death would somehow fix public services, pointing out that higher taxes haven't exactly performed miracles for the NHS. Instead, he suggested trimming bureaucratic fat, a radical notion for politicians seemingly allergic to efficiency.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it. Sorry?
BBC. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot, okay? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do. But people like me will simply put it in a trust.
This time, the target was solely Keir Starmer and his Labour Party, who were subjected to an absolute roasting during a farmer protest.
And so long as I live for 7 years, that's fine. And as my daughter said, you will live for 7 years. You might be in a deep freeze at the end of it, but you will live for 7 years. But it's incredibly time-consuming to have to do that. And why should all these people have to do that? Why should they?
Armed with his wit, sarcasm and a microphone, Clarkson turned what could have been a routine protest into a verbal fireworks display, exposing what he called the glaring incompetence of Labour's inheritance tax reform proposals.
So one of the reasons Rachel Reeves says she brought this in is to stop wealthy people using it as a way.
No, that was the only reason she did.
Well, no, the other reason was to raise money for public services. Well, have you seen?
Are you listening to this?
Have you tried to get a GP appointment lately?
Yes,
Right.
I just recently had a heart attack.
Okay, so you know it's tough.
Yes.
So where should they get the money from if it's not from farmers?
From farmers.
With
Hear that, everyone?
With
BBC
assets.
thinks you should be paying for everything.
Mrs. Clarkson,
Okay,
you
do
know
you
it's
know
not the
how many
BBC
people
view.
pay inheritance tax in this country?
Clarkson zeroed in on Rachel Reeves's inheritance tax policies, labelling them a disaster in the making. According to his blistering critique, these reforms aren't just misguided, they're an outright attack on farmers. The numbers Clarkson threw out were jaw-dropping. 96% of farmers would reportedly be affected by Labour's proposals. 96%. That's practically every farmer in the country staring down the barrel of financial ruin. Clarkson called it what it was, a policy dreamt up by people who've clearly never stepped foot outside their urban bubbles.
4% pay inheritance tax. 96% of the population of the UK does not pay inheritance tax. After this becomes law, 96% of farmers will.
He didn't stop there. With the verbal precision of a seasoned debater, Clarkson painted Labour's ideas as something that might sound clever in a university lecture, but collapse under the weight of real-world scrutiny. He gleefully described Labour's approach as a product of a sixth-form debating society, a stinging remark that undermined the party's credibility with surgical sarcasm. For a party that prides itself on being the voice of the working class, Clarkson pointed out, they seem woefully out of touch with the very people who grow the nation's food.
Who here, can I just ask, who here is going to be unaffected by these changes? No one.
Right. Where have you got
I
the
know.
96% figure
Well,
from?
you've got 96%. Well, the same place that Rachel Reeves does, from the middle of her head.
Right.
From the sixth form debating society that she was no doubt a member of,
Okay.
which
So-
formed her opinions and yours.
Labour's proposed reforms would essentially tax farmers into extinction, argued Clarkson. Unlike hedge fund managers or real estate tycoons, farmers don't have liquid assets they can sell off to pay taxes. Their wealth is tied up in land, machinery and livestock, all essential to their livelihoods. Clarkson scoffed at the absurdity of Labour's thinking, accusing the party of treating farms like luxury estates rather than working businesses. It's as if, he mused, they believe farmers are sitting on rolling piles of cash instead of dealing with the endless challenges of running an agricultural operation.
I am not expressing opinions.
I'm
literally asking you questions. You know that, Mr. Clarkson.
Right.
So, what is your message to this sculptor?
Please back down, please.
Clarkson took particular aim at Keir Starmer's leadership, or as he implied, lack thereof. He accused Starmer of failing to understand the realities of rural life and of leading a party that's more concerned with posturing than problem-solving. To Clarkson, Labour's policies are little more than soundbites designed to appeal to their urban base, with no regard for the actual consequences. The fact that these proposals could dismantle the very fabric of rural communities? Apparently not high on Starmer's list of priorities.
If you don't understand what somebody's job is, fire them.
And how
The civil service is too top, you know that. I must get on.
But Clarkson's critique wasn't limited to inheritance taxes. He broadened his attack to Labour's overall strategy, which he described as a haphazard collection of poorly thought-out ideas. For example, Labour's promises to fund public services through higher taxes came under heavy fire. With his signature sarcasm, Clarkson questioned how exactly these taxes would magically solve the NHS crisis when decades of tax increases have done little to fix the problem. Is there a secret government handbook, he quipped, that says the NHS only starts functioning properly when we hit 50% taxation?
So, what is your message to this sculptor?
Please back down, please.
And get the money from where?
Well, they've got 40 billion. I'll tell you where you go. Walk into any of the offices around here. If you don't understand what somebody's job is, fire them.
The crowd of farmers couldn't have agreed more. They know better than anyone that public services in rural areas are already stretched thin. GP appointments, scarce, public transport, non-existent. And yet, Labour seems to believe that squeezing more money out of taxpayers will somehow improve things. Clarkson dismissed this notion as laughable, suggesting instead that the government, and Labour in particular, should focus on cutting unnecessary bureaucracy. Why not fire a few overpaid administrators before coming after farmers, he asked, drawing cheers and laughter from the crowd.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. As I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down.
Clarkson also highlighted Labour's inability to see the bigger picture. Farming isn't just a job, it's a way of life, one that sustains communities and feeds the nation. But instead of supporting these essential workers, Labour's policies threaten to destroy the very industry they rely on. Clarkson argued that inheritance tax reforms would force many farmers to sell their land just to pay the government, effectively ending generations of family farming. For a party that claims to champion fairness, he noted, this is a cruel irony.
You're right, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not supposed to be talking, but we've got a few things to say, and I'm going to start with a bit of honesty. I lived in London 25, 30 years, and when I was here, like a lot of people who live in cities and go on Twitter, I thought farmers drove around in Range Rovers, moaning, until February, and then you all went skiing. And then about 5 years ago, I started farming. And I've come to understand just how unbelievably difficult it is, and complicated, and dangerous, and cold. Very cold. Even when we're harvesting, it's cold. And it's just the forest of costs that staggered me.
And then there was the issue of Labour's apparent urban bias. Clarkson suggested that the party's leadership seems to think food appears magically on supermarket shelves, with no regard for the hard work it takes to get it there. Farmers, he reminded the audience, are not faceless entities. They're real people, often working grueling hours in tough conditions to keep the nation fed. Yet Labour, Clarkson argued, treats them as an afterthought, collateral damage in their quest for political power.
Pickup trucks, double cab pickup trucks, being reclassified as company cars. 211% tax rise there. £50 carbon tax on a bag of fertiliser. The basic farm payments altered in such a way that we're getting a lot less than we thought we were going to get. And then there was the inheritance tax business.
Clarkson's takedown was relentless, but it wasn't without purpose. He used the platform to call for a complete reassessment of how both the government and opposition treat rural communities. Farmers, he argued, deserve better than to be used as political scapegoats. Instead of burdening them with more taxes, Clarkson proposed that policymakers focus on practical solutions, like reducing wasteful spending and investing in rural infrastructure.
No, I'm here to support the farmers. It's that simple. They need all the help they can get, really.
Yeah.
Even from me.
Even from you? What's that?
Well, I mean, you take help from wherever you can get it, really, don't you?
Yeah. A quote from you that's been dragged up from the past. I think in 2021 you told the Times that inheritance tax relief was critical to you buying up the farm.
The highlight of Clarkson's speech, however, was his scathing critique of Labour's priorities. He accused the party of being more interested in pandering to their urban voter base than in addressing the needs of rural Britain. Inheritance tax reform, he said, was just the latest example of Labour's inability to grasp the realities of life outside the cities. It's easy to make bold promises when you don't have to live with the consequences, Clarkson remarked, a pointed jab that left little doubt about his opinion of Starmer's leadership.
The real reason I bought it is because I wanted to shoot.
But you oppose what the government's proposing?
Oh, God, yes. I mean, as I've said in the past, if she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we cop this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
By the end of his tirade, Clarkson had not only dismantled Labour's policies, but also positioned himself as a champion of rural Britain. His passionate defence of farmers resonated deeply with the crowd, many of whom have long felt ignored by mainstream politics. Clarkson's ability to combine humour with hard-hitting critique made his speech not just memorable, but impactful, a wake-up call for politicians who continue to underestimate the importance of agriculture.
Consult on management of businesses all the time, as our day job. And actually, today I'm worried about the impact really on the day-to-day running of those businesses. Leaving the inheritance tax is sort of options aside. It's the confidence that the industry feels given the changes. Initially the government's taken away probably about £400 million worth of direct payments over the next 2 or 3 years. That's had a massive impact on businesses' cash flows. We've got heightening in cost and that reduction in income. So it really, and this is off the back of, 2 tough years in terms of weather.
In true Clarkson fashion, he closed his address with a final dose of sarcasm. Turning to the reporters in the audience, he urged them to make sure his words reached the geniuses in Westminster. After all, he joked, they might actually learn something, though he wouldn't hold his breath.
On the here and now, not what's happening in the future. Because simply the business of farming is really struggling at the moment, and they're the people that deliver the food, that deliver the countryside, and the environmental benefits that we see for clean air and clean water.
In the end, Clarkson's speech wasn't just a critique of Labour, it was a rallying cry for common sense in an increasingly disconnected political landscape. Whether or not Keir Starmer and his party will take the hint remains to be seen, but one thing is certain, Jeremy Clarkson has once again proven that when it comes to speaking truth to power, he's in a league of his own.
I think it's the passing down of your family farm to the next generation. As I said earlier, we want our younger ones to take on our farms, our heritage. And for example, for me, I haven't got a farm to pass down, but I have got a business that I've grown since I was 16 years old. So to pass that on to my child now, I'm going to get taxed on that. And actually, can he afford to take that business on? And if he has to then sell 2 tractors, for example, to pay that tax bill, is that going to be unprofitable to actually then make sure he can have a livelihood off that business?
Jeremy Clarkson's fiery critique of Labour's inheritance tax reforms isn't just a wake-up call for politicians, it's a rallying cry for everyone who values fairness and common sense. Farmers are the backbone of this nation, and it's time their voices were heard. If you believe in standing up for rural communities, now's the time to act. Share Clarkson's message and demand better from our leaders. This isn't just about taxes, it's about the future of farming and the preservation of a way of life that feeds us all.